안녕하십니까. 오늘도 이른 아침에 이렇게 많이 나와주셔서 대단히 감사합니다. 그러면 관례에 따라서 제가 영어로 회의를 진행하도록 하겠습니다. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You know, during last 20 years, we've been running this distinguished lecture forum, but today's lecture is very, very special. We invited two very special guest speakers. Mr. Jeffrey Schott from the Peterson Institute in Washington, D.C., and Professor Fukagawa Yukiko from Waseda University. Both of them are very good friends of mine and actually good friends of Korea. Professor Fukagawa, I'm sorry to change your name. Fukagawa will share her very candid and objective view of the so-called Abenomics. We all know of Abenomics and we hear a lot about Abenomics. And she will share with us her very candid and objective view of the Abenomics, what it means, and what it means not only to Japan and Japanese, but Korea and the rest of the world. She knows Korea so well and Korean economy so well, so I think she will share her views on the impacts of Abenomics on Korea and the rest of the world. And then Jeff Schott will follow her to talk about TPP, which is, you know, the Pacific Partnership Agreement. Because the Japanese government, led by Prime Minister Abe, decided to join the TPP. So Jeff will tell us what it means to Japan and this region in particular and the rest of the world. In fact, one of the essence of the Abenomics is the structural adjustment, and that structural adjustment has a lot to do with TPP. So I think the Jeff will provide us the views on the Japanese economy from the perspective of the U.S. and particularly from the trade side. Since both speakers were here before, I don't think they need a long introduction. As I said, the Professor Fukagawa actually stayed in Korea some times ago, actually studied at the Korea University as a visiting scholar, visiting fellow there, and the KIT some time ago. And actually, the professor speaks Korean better than myself. And actually, this morning, she can speak either Korean or English. But since she's sharing the podium with Jeff, maybe she want to speak in English. But she speaks Korean very, very fluently. And then she used to teach at Tokyo University, but she's now teaching at Waseda University. And she is the leading economist in Japan studying on Korea and this region in East Asia. And she is a very, very good economist. And actually, she writes columns in Korean newspapers and media frequently. She provides her very, very candid views on the Korean economy and provide various policy recommendations and suggestions for the policymakers. We appreciate that. And then Mr. Jeff Schott, who is with Peterson Institute with Fred Buxton and his group, and he has been there since 1983. He is a senior fellow there. He has been most influential to the U.S. government in terms of formulating U.S. trade policies. And Jeff is the most practical and policy-oriented trade economist in Washington and perhaps in the world. And he has been involved in the Uruguay round and NAFTA, and actually he, as a Treasury official, he participated in Tokyo round in his early days. And then he moved to Peterson, and then he's been writing books and articles, and including Chorus FTA as early as 1981. He wrote a book on the Korea-US FTA in 1981. I mean 2000. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm still sleeping. Yeah, 2001, as early as 2001. Jeff is not that old in 1981. Yes. Okay. And he is he has been a good friend. We've been good friends for many years. Well, with no further ado, I'd like to invite first Professor Fukagawa. Please join me in welcome.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Isakon, for your kind introductions. And of course, it's my great honors to attend this breakfast meeting with such good traditions. And I know that Japan-Korea relationship is almost in a crisis kind of tensions now, and it's a great opportunity to speak something on Japan. Probably must be the right timing, and I really would like to appreciate my sincere gratitude for IG staff also for supporting us when I was trying to come here. And today's my topic is Abenomics, and subtitle is Japan's Last Challenge, because now 2012 is the year of the retirement for the baby boomers in Japan. So probably this might be the last chance for Japan to do something positive. And of course, as one taxpayer, I do hope the result would be successful enough, but we don't know. Well, I would, the major outlines of my talk today is like this, and I would like to touch upon something why the Abe just came in and Abenomics was started, and the impact of Abenomics on Japanese economies in the short term, because we've been just doing it for a couple of months. So the real sector, real economy's response is still very somewhat mixed. And then for the latter part, I would like to concentrate on the impact on Korean economies, and especially trying to have some positive suggestions what we can do probably in the future. The Abe came at the end of last year with the landsliding victories of election, and sorry, it just came back. And there was a great change in politics, and I think there are three reasons that push the Abe's victory. One is our painful experiences since the global financial crisis started with the collapse of the Lehman Brothers, and that has realized Japan that how supply chain, especially in the manufacturing, like Toyotas, were all stretched out in a global, and we are so much integrated in the global economy. So we've got to survive with the global economy. That was one greatest lesson. And the second thing was the fiscal pressure. And of course, we have to spend a lot to save the people without home since the big earthquake. Still 300,000 of people are without home. So we've got to do something. And the third thing is the relationship with the rest of Asia, especially China and Korea. And actually, Korea's business success, while we are spending the so-called 2 decades, just has awakened the Japanese politicians that in terms of the seriousness about the reform in Japan. And especially voters in Japan are very much sick and tired about the total incapacity by democratic people of Japan, especially after Fukushima accident. And there's another rising tensions naturally with China. So that has all these things has pushed the LDP to come back in power. And so in that sense, there seems to be a strong commitment or even consensus that finally made in Japan that we have to stop deflation. We have to get out from the deflationary pressure. And the second thing is, well, to do that, definitely we need some more growth. And the DPJ was never spent so much effort in terms of growth. What they care was all the distributions. And the final consensus was probably, after all, we are the part of global economy, so we have to globalize the Japanese economy. So DPJ's logic was very different from the ancient LDP. If the government support the household by providing child-raising support or Medicare or whatever, the household is going to expand the consumptions, and that is going to stimulate the corporate sectors, and the economy will be back in the growth. But that logic never worked. And now the new LDP's logic is different. And the government has tried to be more pro-business, trying to stimulate the corporate sector, and then there should be rise of wage and more job opportunities, and then the household will be in a better shape. And that sort of strategies is very different. But the the biggest essential change is that BOJ, Bank of Japan's commitment for the macroeconomic policies. Well, since the bubble crash, actually BOJ has been playing, at least has made certain efforts to let the economy go back to the right track, and that provided a lot of interesting economic discussion about the global leading economists, including the Krugman or Stiglitz or whatever, and liquidity trap, and the responses by the central bank was very carefully and very deeply studied in the U.S., and that has provided Bernanke's greatest jobs on the monetary policies. But actually BOJ has always been too slow, too little, and that was a major frustration. And this time we hope may be different. There's a political commitment towards the change in the macroeconomy. So the head of the BOJ was switched from Shirakawa's to Kuroda. And Abe is very much supporting the enormous experimental historical quantitative easing. So the the tensions is something closest to the first reforming period in the starting from 2001 to during the Koizumi period. So that was a story, and Abenomics is not just with the macro policies, but the Abe is always stressing about the three arrows. And one arrow is macro policies, and now the government and BOJ are trying to push the try to reach the target of 2% of inflations during the another 2 years, and the BOJ is buying 7 trillion yen of asset per month. That is a huge operations, and of course that naturally has brought down the highly appreciated yen to a further depreciation. And now, thanks to the recovery by the U.S. economy, well, maybe the speed has been somewhat too fast than we expected, but it has pushed up the equity market, and the atmosphere in Japan is maybe the brightest ever after Koizumi reforms. And now the second arrow is the effective fiscal spending, and LDP has been always criticizing DPJ, say that you just scattered around all the taxpayers' money without any result. So there's a tremendous emergency plans in fiscal year this year, and that is another reasons for Japan to come back to the growth. Almost certainly is expected to certain this year. And the third arrow is growth strategies. And this is going to be the most important one. After all, just a macro policy, you cannot change everything, and we have to do a lot of homework that we've never done during the last 2 decades. So we need disaster recovery, and also the land protections for the big earthquake is quite possible in the future. And energy innovation is another sectors, and there's another things just following. Okay, so Korean media actually has been very critical about the Abenomics, trying to say that Japan is artificially trying to depreciate the yen, so that the competition by doing that, Japan is trying to compete with Korea. But actually, what Japan is doing is very similar with the rest of the mature economies in crisis. If you see this chart, actually, since the crisis started, even the U.S. has been doing QE 1, 2, 3, and the peak scale is almost more than 20% of whole GDP in the U.S. And the still Europeans are doing the similar thing, but the level is very smaller. So the chances that Europeans will be getting another Japan is quite possible, probably. And the scale is, of course, in Japan is quite large. It's almost Abenomics, the easy money is worth like more than 30%, nearly 40% of whole GDP. So definitely we have to find the exit for this operation, otherwise that should be very difficult. So this is the cover page of recent London Economist, and is it a bird or is it a plane? No, it's Japan. So that Abe Shinzo appears as Superman, and the China's tycoon is there. And maybe Korean atmosphere, they had to change the attire, but that's probably the G7 perceptions that, we are doing quite a similar thing, why Japan can't. So that may be the different image in G20, probably. But but anyway, the impact of Abenomics so far has been very positive, and since the whole with the whole mobilizations of every policy efforts, with the Japanese economies is now with their full engine, and the first quarter GDP growth is almost 3.5 in an annual basis, which is very much outstanding, and the equity market has started to pick up, and the private consumption is very much stimulated thanks to the rise of the equities. And it's not just penetrated into the people lower than the middle class, but still the rich men at least are very happy about the equity market. And then property and housing investment is also very much stimulated. And in addition to that, the government has been spending so much naturally through the public investment. The demand is created so much, and export recovery is somewhat moderate. Probably we are still in a so-called J-curve, but and the volume has not picked up fully. But we hope that things will be getting better, and but actually there will be a technical backlash starting next year, because we have to raise up the value-added tax to 10%. To sustain the government the budget. So the demand that we are now seeing is won't be that sustainable, and definitely there should be a certain public spending cut starting next year, trying to get the exit, because the Japan's government debt is very much too huge, to 200 and almost 40% per GDP. So there won't be not so much spending, and so what is crucial is the macro economy has been somewhat positive, so real GDP pick up, and the corporate sector profit is now coming back, but actually it has not recovered before the crisis period, so we have to go still a long way to go, and the topics was almost doubled. And the consumptions started to go up, but if you look carefully, the income of the employee has not really increased that much. So definitely we have to build to get out from the deflationary pressure. We have to do with the labor market, something to do with the labor market, and unemployment rate also is going down, while the ratio of effective job offers has been constantly increasing, but it has not recovered the pre-crisis period. And export has been picking up, not really. So we have to be more serious about export, probably. But this is the right one here. The right one here is the first quarters of 2013, and the growth structures is a combinations of export and public consumptions. And if only we can add some investment in the private sector, that growth should be far more healthier, maybe the healthiest after the Lehman Brothers shock. And so the point of Abenomics is, of course, naturally, since the government debt is too huge, that there is a delicate things in the market, and sometimes if we see the rise of interest rate, especially in the long-term one, that might be the that should be very much controlled through the dialogue with the market. So inflation target is achieved, and if Japan finds some exit, that should be the good way of interest hike. But if we just don't do anything at all, the risk premium will be added to the long-term interest. That will be very much that is going to add up another crisis in Japan. So and also the government budget will see some catastrophe. So we have to be very much careful about the hike of the interest rate. And actually directions of BOP, balance of payment, and Japan is almost to record the current account deficit instead of surplus. And the trade balance is already in a deficit since the earthquake, and all the atomic power generations stopped virtually in Japan. And so the real focus is how we'll be able to make the growth strategy successful or not. So innovations is very much needed, especially facility investment is very crucial for the Japanese recovery, and that is going to create more jobs and wage hikes, and that may also have some positive impact on the current account surplus. And growth strategy, if the growth strategy didn't work at all, and still the investment by private sectors is going abroad, and well, maybe the demand is so weak and the low interest rate will be maintained, but and probably that is going to further depreciate the yen, but we don't know. There can be some bipolarized sectors in the Japanese economy. Asset bubble will continue, but if we cannot something to do with the bubbles, another big shock might be possible. So the real issues is how we can get the growth strategies on the right track. And since we haven't been so serious about this for 2 decades, there's a huge homework that's very much accumulated in front of us. So it should be a very comprehensive kind of reforms. And first, we have to do something with the labor market. We have to stimulate the mobility of the persons. The reasons why Korea has been doing much better than Japan is, well, thanks to the IMF crisis. There was a labor market reform in a very painful way, but the Japanese companies have been trying to maintain all the jobs, and that has even constrained the change in a corporate sector. So the mobility of the labor market is one thing, and also that requires the flexibilities. And one thing that Abe has been stressing is the more participations by women. And I don't know whether he's quite a traditional kind of Japanese man, but somewhat for the political purpose, he's been very much kind to women. So nowadays, almost all the Japanese big firms are expected to hire the Japanese women as a corporate managers, and that sort of movement is going on. But still, and the second thing is corporate governance reform, and this is very much not fully touched upon yet. And without this one, without the change of the new companies coming up and the rotten companies, the chances for the rotten companies, zombie companies to be kicked out from the market, we won't be able to change at all. And the innovations system definitely requires a lot of reform, and the government commitments towards the strategic support is very much needed. And IPR, intellectual property right, and standardizations is a huge problem about the Japanese industries. And now, to make the best use of the so-called big data-based innovation, Japanese IT infrastructures is very poor, so we need some more investment towards that. And the fourth one is very much stressed, especially stimulated by the challenge coming from China. And China is mostly actually from Korea. So it's location strategies, and everything was so costly in Japan, and we have to raise the attractions of the local location, and that was another thing. And finally, the human capital education reforms are all going on to keep up with the globalizing world. And the English-speaking capabilities is a big problem in Japan, so we've got to do something for it. So there are so many homework. Innovations based on the so far, the reasons why Japan has been relatively successful in explaining what we are trying to do, especially among the G7, is that we are not so much targeting the depreciation of yen, and through we are not aiming to go back through the encouraging the export. Actually, the innovations is rather focused on the domestic market, and we are not trying to make so-called kind of mercantile policies, and that was the major explanations. And actually, it's true. In some ironical way, the reasons why Japan has been so stagnant in the last 2 decades is that export industries has been losing their competitiveness constantly. So we need some serious innovations, probably which will be started in just only the domestic market. And healthcare and medical service is the very focused issue now, because we have since a large number of aging societies, the market is pretty huge. So Japanese government decided to have National Institute of Health following the U.S. type. That is comprehensive headquarters for the Medicare. So Medicare, including regenerative medicines and health promotions, because Japan is spending almost a quarter of the whole national budget on the health and pensions. So we've got to do something on it. Then the second issue is energy innovation. And now comprehensive energy plan should be established again, because we are not sure whether how much we are going to abandon the nuclear power generations, and investment into the clean coal powers is not good enough. And now some of the peoples are very much happy about the methane hydrate deposit in Japan, and that is going to be another new energy. Well, for the deposit is almost the volume is 100 years of demand in a Japanese economy. And the Japanese territorial waters is number 5th in the world, so maybe that should be good enough if it's only marketized successfully. And we need some infrastructure renovation, both hardware and software. And since we are the only countries in advanced economy without the individual personal number, social security number, so we've got to do something on it. And agriculture reform is going to be pushed very hardly, because thanks to the TPP pressure, and TPP is my personal sense is a very good opportunity for Japan to rebuild the whole system. And now government has finally started to be serious about the productivities in agricultural sectors. And it's a blessing, I hope. The agriculture reform is going to be under the market pressure rather than the politicians' vested interest. So agriculture is a fourth categories, and finally, maybe, some people are interested in promotions of services like content industries, fashions, or whatever. So let's go to the impact on the Korean economy. In one sense, it may end the kind of anything but Japan growth kind of structures in Korea. Some people in Japan are criticizing the Koreans' growth, saying that, Korea is doing desperately that anything but Japan. So Japan was suffering from the further constantly by yen appreciated further whenever crisis came, and since the corporate tax is so heavy on the major big businesses, and after the earthquake, there's a severe energy constraint, and Hatoyama just set up a crazy standard for environment standards, so that has constrained the competitiveness, and the labor cost is super high in terms of the productivity, and FTA negotiations never the speed has been so slow. So these are the problems of the Japanese economy, but Korea was very much different. Won was depreciated, and the government is very pro-business, supporting the business, and there's a tremendous energy subsidies through the Korean electronic power. And CO2 commitment is not so much really unrealistic like in Japan, and labor cost is still cheaper and FTA have. So some of the people are saying that at least to compete with the Korean major industries, we have to do something on it. Unnecessary. We have to get rid of some unnecessary disadvantageous conditions. So, but so far, Korea has been very successful, and it's very interesting things as the industrial structures has converged so much. Koreans' major leading industries, the market share has soared, and even the Japanese FDI was very much attracted by the Korean final users, and there might be some technological catch-up. But there's a contradictions. Well, interestingly, as Korea has been successful, there's a tremendous convergence in both two economies. So we are competing so desperately, and Korea has been actually suffering from the constant deteriorations of terms of trade. And of course, energy is very much used for that, and the weaker won pressures the energy cost. And interestingly, since the competition has been rising, the impact coming from yen-won relationship has been even getting bigger. So that's a sort of things that we've seen so far. So in 2000, Japan was not competing with Korea, and this shows export share of electronics and the intermediate goods. In 2000, and the global market share in major leading markets are all larger in Japan, but in decades it's changed quite a lot, and German just also came in, but Korea has been doing so well. And the trade this shows the trade specializations between Japan and Korea. And if you see that the red line in the bottom is in the center, that's here, it's not working. Is coming to is getting closest to zero. That means the trade between Japan and Korea is even getting more horizontal than before, and that is very much led by the electronics, and also in recent years transportation machinery, because we've been importing a lot of Korean parts in the recent years. But unfortunately, the terms of trade, the pink line here is getting worse and worse. And it's not the problems like economic democratizations, but it's deteriorations of TOT that has pressures the Korean small companies. But this is quite similar, since by trying to compete with the Korean rivals, Japan could never been successful in raising up the exporting cost. So the TOT has been constantly deteriorated in Japan too. And this shows the topics relationship with the change of the topics with the N-won exchange rate and N-dollar exchange rate. And if you show the left-hand side is the N-won relationship, since there are many investors, global investors see Japan and Korea as competing, the Japanese topics is getting something more closer with the change of yen-won rate rather than yen-dollar rate. So this is interesting things. So the first hypothesis is that Korean has been so much successful. Well, probably based on the anything but Japan strategies, but the result is it has prepared more and more competitive relationship, and because of that, the price competitiveness has got so much crucial for Korean industries, and that's why the N-won relationship has pressured the Korean industries, and that one thing. But the second hypothesis is that, well, probably some of the, at least the Korean major industries has been so much globalized and far more in such a far greater speed than Japan. And, well, the Korean market share, is the result of Korean globalization. So I'm quite something, sympathetic to this idea. And, financial crisis awoke, in my sense, the Korean business for the real essence about the understandings of the globalization. And that is a very different structures compared with Japan. So the Korean big business has been pursuing the dominant strategies they got earlier in the emerging market, and they've been successful. And the outside labor market is very much used up now for the Korean business. That is not so much in Japan. And and another thing is the change of the technology. So it's now the time for the market-driven change rather than the technology-driven market. So this kind of differences, this is a technology projection model, and that is a traditional Japanese and European models in ancient manufacturing sectors. Technology pushes the market. But new models and under globalizations is more the ideas. It's the market or originated ideas that is going to push the businesses. So in that sense, Korea has far more sophisticated responses if compared to Japan. That's a second hypothesis. And the final hypothesis is that, well, actually, if you look at the output table in both in Japan and Korea, actually, the import input is very different. Even Japan has been trying to adapt into the appreciation of yen, but still import input coefficient is far lower than Korea, and Korea's is higher. So that means Korea may be more neutral to change in exchange rate, in a real effective exchange rate. Much more stronger if compared to Japan. So shock on the trade probably will be greater. And in the meantime, probably Korean major industry will be able to cancel out the import cost because the won got higher and the import cost is getting cheaper, so that Korea is going to reshape the exporting competitiveness. So the relative competitiveness actually has been depending on rather than won yen rate rather than dollar won rate in recent years. So that's the probably the third hypothesis. So in looking from Japan, Korea seems to have some contradictory kind of responses about the Abenomics. In terms of the anything but Japan strategies, well, interestingly, Korea seems to be desperately trying to compete with Japan by making another Japan, maybe smaller Japan, with quite a similar industrial structures. So that it has created more price competitions, and that has negatively so far negative impact on coming from Abenomics. And the second one is the dominant strategies and managerial resources concentrations into the big business firms like Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motors. But the you are winning in that style, but, so how you're going to adjust the relationship with the political pressure or even the social pressure coming from the economic democratization, we don't know. So there should be more competitions with Japan by large companies, but actually in terms of SME, I think we can get some far better relationship in promoting SMEs. And the third issue is, since Korea is quite an open structures, after all, your exporting industries will regain the competitiveness again once all the adjustment is done. But Korea is always suffering from the massive inflow and outflow by through the totally open capital. But as long as Korea is so much committing to the financial hub, there's nothing that you can do for the capital markets totally open. But you can't complain about the fluctuation of won if you're interested in a financial hub. But that's issues. So I think Park Geun-hye's registrations policies that the only way to recover the competitiveness is the effort by in productivities or innovations in corporate sectors is a right policies that Korea should take. So the but the Abenomics is still there, and there are a couple of things that we can think about together. Finding opportunities may be more constructive rather than bashing Abe. Well, you can bash the Abe in terms of diplomatic policies and other things, but the market reality is still there. And the market is very much integrated already. So we have to make the best use of industrial accumulations between both Japan and Korea, and that's first-rate productivity. That is industry accumulations with full of ideas for innovations, and that should be used for the SME. And the another thing is yen-won transaction market. Since there is no direct transaction between yen and won, and interestingly, Korean government has decided to have Chinese yuan, which is far smaller in terms of international opportunities for transactions or investment, but still there's no yen-won transaction. So that's why the government cannot intervene into the yen-won relationship. So that might be another opportunities that we can incorporate. And the strategic values of standardization, since at least in automobiles and electronics, we are the very strong powers, and the standardizations in an Asian way might be good opportunities for Korean big business. And so and secondly, we have to survive in globalizations, and especially recent years, in terms of human capital, Japan has been very much benefited by the well-educated Korean young labor force. And many Japanese big companies are hiring a lot of Korean ambitious guys as candidates for the managers. So the complement and also the relationships are quite complementary. So since we are not competing with Sogo Shosha trading houses and the mega banks with Korea, and those two sectors are supporting Koreans' real sector industries, and the complementary relationship is still there. And the third one is the IO structures, but that is probably I can skip. So the temporary conclusions is that the market is already integrated, so we have to see and find the best result out of it. So first, maybe it should be better to separate the business logic from politics, and maybe Korea is trying to do that. But the Japanese media is also distorted as like a Korean media, frankly speaking. So the image of Korea is getting more and more like image of China in recent years, unfortunately in Japan. So we have to separate the business from political logic, or performance by the politicians. And impact of Abenomics actually is maybe too much inflated in a negative way. And considering Korea's recent performance, you can still make the good use of Abenomics through the division of labor with the Japanese companies. And actually, once it's established, it's nothing. Abe's easing policies is nothing. And that's why the Samsung has never been influenced so much by Abenomics at all. And Japan's recovering, second thing is, it's going to provide opportunities for common strategic business like Medicare. Japan has been very much benefited by the allocation policies by Korean government, and we have a lot of talented people in a common as a common pool. For these new services. And the final one is market interventions may have deteriorated the terms of trade in the past. So we have to be something loyal to the market logic. Okay, so maybe well, I think in a simple conclusions is that there is two choices. Well, Japan is going to ruin, and that is going to create such a big shock on still on global economies. We are investing $14 trillion to the market, and that is going to trigger big problems in the global economy, and that is going to hurt the Korean economy too. So I think that no matter how emotional you can be negative about Abe, but still in terms of the economic logic, I think the recovery will be benefits the Korean industries in the future through cooperation. Thank you very much.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. And Dr. Sogong, thank you again for inviting me back to this important breakfast forum. This is almost a home away from home for me. Whenever I come to Seoul, I always have good company for breakfast, and I thank you very much for continuing this wonderful tradition. I thought this morning, to complement Professor Fukagawa's presentation, I would talk a bit about Japan and the Trans-Pacific Partnership because there are important new developments and because it has implications for Korean's trade strategy going forward. I know time is short, so I'm going to skip through some of the slides, but I understand that the presentation will be available from IGE if anyone wants the whole slide deck after the meeting. The first thing to note is that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a big deal in the making, and adding Japan will make it an even bigger deal. There will be 12 countries participating starting this summer, and they account for 38% of global output and 24% of global exports of goods and services. These countries are like-minded in terms of their desire to seek a comprehensive deal covering trade and investment in goods and services. Basically, it's much like expanding the Chorus FTA across the Asia-Pacific. In some areas, the TPP even seeks to go beyond what was in Chorus. In some areas, because you're dealing with a widely diverse range of countries, the provisions of the TPP will be slightly weaker or less comprehensive than the Chorus FTA. But though all of the countries are like-minded in wanting to have a comprehensive agreement, they understandably have different priorities and they have different sensitivities. Japan does not want to include rice in the negotiations. The United States doesn't want to include maritime services. There are many other areas that will pose problems for the negotiations. The agreement seeks to substantially upgrade existing pacts. Many of the member countries of the TPP already have bilateral or regional pacts with their trading partners, but they are of a much weaker nature. And of course, it is an important stepping stone to broader Asia-Pacific and multilateral trade accords, because what is produced in the TPP will help inform negotiators in Geneva and around the world on how to deal with pressing new problems in international trade. Now, the TPP talks are advanced, but they're not ready to close. They're currently in their 17th negotiating round since March of 2010. The TPP leaders talk about finishing the talks later this year, but that ain't going to happen. There are a large number of sticking points on farm trade, on services reforms, on investment, intellectual property, and others. And negotiators must first narrow down these differences before pursuing their endgame negotiations. And for the United States, negotiators will need new fast-track authority, which is only beginning to be discussed again in the U.S. Congress. The previous fast-track authority expired the day after the Chorus FTA was signed in June of 2007. Now, just to give you an idea of what still faces the TPP negotiators, there are a number of sticking points. These come up in lots of negotiations, but in market access, it's liberalization, protecting dairy, sugar, and rice, and tariffs and rules of origins on textiles, clothing, and footwear, services trade reforms, especially on financial services. Just recall all the battles of the Chorus FTA, and we're seeing a repeat of many of those in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But there are also many new rulemaking issues that are still undecided, involving intellectual property rights, investor-state disputes settlement procedures, new provisions on disciplines on state-owned enterprises to ensure competitive neutrality, which is an important new issue and which will have important implications for Japan as well. Environment, labor, use of capital controls. There's a long, long list. I'm probably only summarizing some of the existing problems. Now to get to the heart of it. What are Japanese interests and objectives? Well, the first objective is a strategic one, in strengthening the bilateral alliance with the United States, much like it was for Korea in negotiating the Chorus FTA. But in this case, there's also a particular concern, and that is because of the need to diversify and expand energy resources. And here, the immediate goal is to help promote the export of liquefied natural gas from the United States to Japan. And that has made big progress because of the work that the Japanese and U.S. officials have done with each other. And just in the past week or so, the U.S. government has approved regulatory proceedings for a new LNG export facility, which will be able to service Japan in the next few years. So that's an important point. Second point, which goes to the heart of what Professor Fukagawa was talking about, was to reinforce efforts to reform domestic economic policies, basically to promote more competition and regulatory reform in the Japanese economy. This is something where Korea has leapfrogged Japan in recent years, in large part because of the Chorus FTA and many of the other trade agreements that complement the domestic economic reforms that Korea has instituted over the past decade. That was the strategy that Han Duck-soo had when many, many years ago as trade minister, he started talking about a Chorus FTA in order to boost productivity and innovation in the Korean economy. And it's a strategy that, it was great vision, and it's a strategy that has worked over the past decade. There's also a need for Japan to upgrade and expand its bilateral and regional trading arrangements, call it an EPA modernization program, and also to avoid discrimination from other pacts, including the Chorus FTA. Now, the discrimination is quite evident when you look at what the prospective income and export gains would be from Japan's joining the TPP. The TPP 11 is the current group of countries without Japan, joining, and you can see that there would be some small income losses and export diversion. Very small, but still the sign is negative. But a TPP 12 includes Japan and shows remarkable difference and significant growth going forward from these are percentage increases and dollar increases off the baselines of those prospective years. So it's a bigger boost from the TPP than from Japan's participation in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which presages much more limited reform among the ASEAN plus 6 countries. But there's an important point here, both for Japan and Korea. The TPP and the RCEP are not alternatives. And indeed, if you look at the numbers, their results are rather complementary and additive. And so the benefits are of pursuing one will only be increased by pursuing both at the same time. And that's the strategy that Japan is now pursuing, and one that Korea could be pursuing in going forward. Now, to get into the TPP, countries have to ask to join. And when Japan finally made the political decision to ask the existing membership to join, they had to get the approval of all of the member countries participating in the TPP. But the biggest challenge was getting the United States to agree. And for that, you may remember Wendy Cutler. She was frequently here in Seoul during negotiating the Chorus FTA. Well, she negotiated what I would call a prenuptial agreement between Japan and the TPP countries and the United States that was the basis for accepting Japan to join the negotiations this coming July. Like other entrants, and I'll mention this, but I'll go through this very quickly because it's important. If Korea considers joining TPP, it will face a similar situation where it will need to accept the text of already completed chapters of the agreement. But there are other things that Japan had to do that Korea wouldn't have to do because Korea has already implemented or is in the process of implementing substantial reforms as a result of its trade agreements with the United States and the European Union. But the prenuptial includes constraints on issuances by Japan Post Insurance, increasing the number of imported U.S. vehicles eligible for a preferential handling procedure for auto imports, as well as a number of other provisions relating to motor vehicle trade, which is highly sensitive in the U.S. Congress. Japan agreed to a back-end loading of the elimination of U.S. motor vehicle tariffs, for example, which is not as big a deal as it would be for Korea because Japan sources about 70% of its North American sales from North American production. And the Korean figure, I think, is growing up towards about 50% from a lower base. But there are other commitments to negotiations on non-tariff measures, some which have to be completed before the TPP negotiations are concluded, such as in motor vehicles, others that have a slightly longer time horizon. Now, Japan's entry complicates the talks, but actually makes a big deal more likely. There will be a substantial increase for the United States and other TPP countries from Japanese participation due to the investment reforms and liberalization of insurance and other services and farm products by Japan. That makes for stronger economic growth in Japan, but it also means greater opportunities for exporters and foreign investors in the Japanese market. Japan will also be a strong supporter of investment and intellectual property provisions, and so should make it easier for those sticking points to be resolved. And finally, having Japan at the table means that other countries that have been hesitant to move forward with some of the chorus FTA type demands put forward by the United States will be more willing to do so because, bluntly speaking, Australia, New Zealand, and others are riding the coattails of the United States in getting a free trade agreement with Japan, which they have been unable to do by themselves for many years. And so this is worth something for them, and they will be more flexible in terms of their commitments to the TPP and the United States in working through this long list of sticking points. Now, final point, because I know we're running late and want to leave a few minutes for questions. Why I think Korea should follow Japan into the TPP, and I think we've discussed some of these already. First is additionality. It would mean new trading partners for Korea. Korea-Japan bilateral free trade talks were launched almost 10 years ago and were suspended almost 9 years ago. So there's a lot more that can be done there with Australia, Canada, Mexico, New Zealand. There's a lot more that can be done in a regional forum. And I do think in the Korea-Japan context, it will be easier to work through some of the competitiveness concerns in a regional negotiation rather than in a bilateral negotiation. Second, there's the additionality of upgrading old pacts, especially Korea's pacts with ASEAN members. But even the Chorus FTA could be upgraded in some areas, such as with regard to state-owned enterprises. Third, joining the TPP would enhance Korea's leadership role in the world trading system. It already has taken those steps in the G20. Dr. Sogong led a very successful G20 meeting here in Seoul a few years ago, where Korea demonstrated its leadership capabilities and responsibilities. It is also taking a leadership role because the Chorus FTA is essentially the state-of-the-art now of world trading rules. So Korea has set the standard for world trading system, and it can continue to do that in the Asia-Pacific context. And indeed, it is playing a leadership role in bridging the TPP and the RCEP, the Asia-Pacific and the intra-Asian economic integration initiatives through its negotiations with China. And there's limited entry cost, as I said before, because Korea has already produced the reforms that are essentially going to be required by the TPP. And I think there's limited risk of losing the rice exemption that was won in the Chorus FTA, because Japan being in will be a strong advocate of keeping rice out. The final point is there's significant cost of non-participation, and this is the point I'll leave you with, and it's a table. And it's just like the table for Japan a moment ago. But this time it shows Korea's prospective income and export gains from a TPP 12, including Japan, and a TPP 13, including Japan and Korea. And you can see, just like Japan suffered some very small, modest losses on income and exports by staying out of the TPP, Korea would as well. But if it joins, it begins to achieve some rather significant gains to both income and exports. So it is not like you're just repeating the same old exercise. There's a lot to be gained from joining this, and it's something to be considered as Korea's government moves forward with its trade strategy in the coming year. Thank you very much.
You were excellent and illuminating presentations. Since we have two outstanding speakers, I suppose you want to stay here all day, but unfortunately we don't have that much time. And so we have very limited time, about 15 minutes. Actually, I was supposed to end the minutes before the 9 o'clock, but we have to have another 10 minutes, so 9 o'clock sharp. So for that, if you have any question, make it very, very succinct and very short. Yes. Okay, Mr. Hong, and there's one hand, and Mr. Ken, and Dr. Lee Gyung-tae, and Dr. Yang, and Dr. An. Okay. For first round, that's just make it short and keep it.
Dr. Schott, especially your comprehensive comment on TPP with Japan and so. As you probably know, that Korea's our reliance on trade with China is growing so rapidly, up to 25%. But if we include Hong Kong, it comes more than 30%. So at this stage, you have recommended Korea on the longer run to join TPP is rather better, like Japan. But how do you evaluate? Once we assume that Korea participate, but we might lose or some of minus impact on our trade with Japan. So I think our government position is very nowadays delicate, thinking of that. Would you give some more your view and comment, especially taking into account losing China or some of damage once we participate in TPP? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, now, please.
Okay, my name is David Shin. I would like to make some question to both of you, the presenter, in Korean. So I suggest to you the earphone. Thank you. 저는 데이비드 신입니다. 저는 40년 동안 아메리칸, 유러피언, 코리안 기업의 CEO로 일해오고 있습니다. 오늘 프레젠테이션 잘 들었습니다. 먼저 유키코 후쿠가와 씨한테 질문하고 싶습니다. 아베노믹스, 아베 총리의 경제정책. 제가 생각하기에는 이분이 총리로 시작하면서 철저하게 과거 역사를 부정하고 침략 정책을 부정하고 하는 이런 배타조의 정치 사상에서 시작했다고 생각을 합니다. 또 그런 주변의 공정 공용 대신에 우리 일본 구구주의 정신 하에 우리가 우리 혼자 성장해야 되겠다는 그런 정신을 가지고 시작한 것인데, 과연 이러한 아베노믹스가 성공할 수 있는지, 그리고 주변 이웃나라, 특히 한국과 중국 이웃나라와 공정공용에 기여할 수 있는지 하는 것을 질문하고 싶습니다. 저 개인적인 생각에는 절대 성공할 수 없다고 생각합니다. 두 번째 질문입니다. 잠깐 기다려주세요. 두 번째 질문.
이거 빨리 좀 하십시오.
두 번째 질문. 두 분한테 이러한 근본적으로 잘못된 생각하기 시작된 아베노믹스가 과연 소위 말하는 TPP, 트랜스패시픽 아시아의 리전의 공정공용에 기여할 수 있고 소위 글로벌라이제이션 이코노미의 발전에 기여할 수 있는지 저는 의심이 많습니다. 두 분한테 다시 한번 질문합니다. 감사합니다.
오케이. Dr. Kim, yes. 지금 시간이 없기 때문에 좀 질문 간단하게 해주십시오.
Quick questions, one each to speakers. Professor Fukagawa first. Abenomics sustainability. Now that Japan's debt ratio is approaching very quickly 250% GDP, it's okay to spend money now, but how far can they go without really breaking the whole frameworks? The question to Dr. Schott. The TPP first started out as fully complying to the MFP, most favored nation clause. Japan, of course, is most anathema. Now, in this prenuptial agreement you mentioned, they came up with a very quick, cute dance saying that no exceptions recognized, but sensitive areas recognized. Now, this is diplomatic compromise, but when it comes down to the reality, how effective or can they really go through this thing? and within the framework of the original spirit.
Okay. And Dr. Lee, yes.
Thank you. Fukagawa Yukiko. I happen to notice the last sentence in your last slide that Koreans had better not complaining about Abenomics. Actually, I'd like to emphasize that we are not complaining at all about Abenomics. We sincerely hope that Abenomics succeeds and Japanese economy recovers, and it will benefit Korean economy also. And also, we respect fully Japanese government's policy, whatever it is, to recover your economy. But on evaluating the impact of Abenomics on Korea, you said that the assessment or perception might be inflated. But now in Korea, there are several analysis, quantitative analysis already going on, undertaken. They all show that the impact on Korea's export will be quite significant because we are becoming more and more competitive in export structure. So what I like to say is that Korea and Japan is neighboring friendly country. And if Japanese domestic policy affects Korea's trade in one way or another, then if there were some pre-consultation or pre-notice or pre-exchange of views, between the two governments, it would be very constructive for more cooperative Northeast Asian economic cooperation. And my very simple question to you is that I think the most important arrow of the Abenomics is the third arrow, the structural adjustment. And in your homework list is very comprehensive. And also at the same time, it's not quite new. So the implementation is the real homework. So what is your observation about Abe government's the willingness and the capacity to implement your homework? This is my question. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Dr. Han, please, and then Dr. Yang. Yes.
Nice to meet you again here. Okay, my question is that the TPP, you think this is a open-ended negotiation game, or did you set any sort of the tentative deadline to settle down TPP 13? That's the first question. And the second question, okay, I acknowledge Korea can enjoy the additionality game, provided that perhaps Japan is ready to open up its agriculture sector and the service sector. So maybe this question also addressed to the Professor Fukagawa. To what extent do you think that Japan is ready to open up agriculture sector, except the rice market, as you indicated, as sticking point? And the third question is that now Korea is negotiating the FTA with China. And you also mentioned that Korea can play a leadership role in bridging together RCEP and the TPP in the long run. So in that sense, you think this Korea should concentrate on Korea-China FTA first, and then wait and see how the TPP develops, and maybe Korea can join later on. So I would like to ask the sequencing of the Korea strategy in terms of dealing the Korea-China FTA and the TPP participation.
Okay. Now, Dr. Yang, yes, you're the last for the first round. Yes.
Thank you, Fukagawa-san and Jeff, for those two huge presentations. You have done my 1 year's of homework on those two topics. Thank you for that. Let me begin by remarking that I find your new name, Yukigawa, very good, meaning snow river. Remember now, from now on.
Innovation, he says.
Now, I have a couple of questions to each First, to Yukigawa-san. Dr. Lee already raised a question about your last sentence. I also had problem digesting your last sentence. But and as Dr. Lee said, the Korean government has not yet raised a formal complaint against Abenomics, especially the yen-yas policy. And I wish that the Korean finance minister would have done that at the latest G20 financial meeting, but he didn't. I think this is really part of a larger problem of appropriate exchange rates alignment policies among major economies. And I think this is a policy issue which should be seriously pursued at the G20 level. And secondly, about the prospects for undertaking the 10 or so reform agenda under your homework, which was also mentioned by Dr. Lee, I cannot see whether all of them can be implemented and sustained with relative ease, possibly with the exception of innovation and renovating infrastructure. I think the answer depends on the political viability and sustainability of Abe government or the Abenomics. And I'd like to ask you for the assessment of the prospects for the political sustainability of Abe government. And to Jeff, you said that if Korea joins TPP, that would represent a much upgrading over chorus in terms of Korea-US trade relationship. In what major ways is this the case? And secondly, yesterday there was this article in the Financial Times about the difficulties that the US administration will be having in pushing the renewed attempt to pass the TP, Trade Promotion Authority, through the Congress. If this proves to be difficult, would that be a major challenge or obstacle to the completion of the TPP? And thirdly, this TPP is often considered to be an anti-China policy, a policy to contain China. In what sense is this the case? China is by design excluded from the negotiation and the pact?
Okay. Yeah, well, okay, full agenda on the table. Now, would you go first, please?
Well, thank you. These are all good questions, and some of them actually overlap a bit. And they also overlap with the last slide of my presentation, which I didn't present to you, which is, are the TPP countries keeping China out? But let me just briefly talk about TPP for Korea. Clearly, you have to first look at the time frame. Korea's talks with China are going to last a couple of years, and they're going to produce an agreement that is much less comprehensive and much more shallow in terms of trade reform and liberalization requirements than the chorus, but hopefully much better than China has negotiated with other countries in the past. So that is how I see Korea contributing to helping to advance the incremental progress of China in adopting more and more rigorous international trade obligations. Now, in terms of the progress towards Asia-Pacific economic cooperation, that's very important. Because you can't have Asia-Pacific economic cooperation unless there is some way of bringing the United States and China together. And here, Korea can play a pivotal role. And that's why I have been encouraging countries to think about pursuing both Asia-Pacific and intra-Asia tracks of integration. And I don't think they are necessarily harmful to each other. They can be pursued in complementary fashion. Now, there is a concern, and Sugul, I think you were right in mentioning that there has been a lot of discussion about the TPP trying to contain China. And I've given a number of talks in China recently about that, and I think it's ridiculous, but shows a bit of confusion in the public debate. You can't contain a country with a trade agreement. But the confusion arises in that TPP countries want to better compete with China. And so they are pursuing trade agreements as a means of reinforcing domestic economic reform so that they can be more productive and efficient and more competitive with China. Exactly why Korea started talking about free trade agreements 13 years ago. And I think for China, I think they recognize that if their trading partners are more prosperous, they have better opportunities for trade and increasingly investment. And so I don't see the same type of fear or concern among Chinese officials that was evidenced in public comments just 6 or 8 months ago. China can't join TPP right now because China hasn't asked to join, and China isn't ready to accept the obligations on transparency and disciplines on market intervention. Government intervention in the marketplace. So that's why it can't. It doesn't mean that it couldn't. And indeed, a year ago, or 2 years ago, one would have said Japan can't join TPP. And yet Japan made dramatic changes. Vietnam has decided to make dramatic changes. Now, it remains to be seen whether they will be able to live up to their ambitions when the deal is ready for signature. But if Vietnam is willing to undertake a 10-year program of economic reform, then it's possible that over the medium term, with the incremental progress that could be achieved by China's talks with Korea, that China would be able to link up. I think more likely we will see a hybrid arrangement emerging over the medium term that allows China and the United States to engage in a regional initiative that's not quite TPP, but is much more comprehensive than the RCEP, and that provides the basis for a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. One last point, and that's on the exceptions policy, because I know it's important, and negotiators have to say that there will be no exceptions. Otherwise, at the start of negotiations, they take things off the table, and pretty soon there's nothing left on the table to negotiate. So it was critical that Japan and U.S. officials and all TPP members said everything is on the table for negotiation. Nothing is taken off. But that doesn't mean at the end of the day that there won't be some products or sectors where the liberalization will be partial, and in fewer sectors where there might even be exceptions, as rice was excluded in the Chorus FTA or sugar in the U.S., Australia. But I think the objective is to do as much as possible, and in terms of agriculture, that means that there will have to be reform in many sectors in Japanese agriculture and in U.S. agriculture, including dairy, including beef, but possibly, since I'm not an official, I can say probably a good possibility that it won't be in rice. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think some of the questions are quite overlapped, so well, just make it quite compact. But after all, the first point is that Japanese economy is too big to fail, and that's the positions in the global economy. So that's why G7 probably just letting the Abenomics going on, despite some of the complaints, especially coming from Korea. But once you accepted the so-called impossible trinity, that you can't keep the three things together, mobility of the capital once your market is opened, and the stability of the exchange rate, and the independent interest policies, you cannot take three goals at the same time, and your system is committed to the floating system. You're supposed to give in, you take in the fluctuations anyway. So what you can do is to prepare some further, prepared by further enhancing the market functions, so that real sector economy will be something have better environment for the adjustment into the real exchange, change in the exchange rate. And that's actually what Japan has been doing. And actually, yen has been fluctuating very large large positions, and one time yen used to be 140, and now we experienced even 75 or so. So it's almost a doubled, in nominal at least, is the changes, the impact of the changes is almost double. But that's what Korea has to tackle with. As long as you're just taking a floating system, you have to adapt into the ever-changing exchange rate. Or the other option is only to make another Hong Kong, to have some pegged, almost fixed exchange rate system, but that's not realistic, taking in the size of Korean economy. So I think one issue is how to improve the non-price competitiveness, including innovations of the quality, competitiveness, and that may be the issues for Korean industries to defend against the fruitless competitions, for price competitions against Japan. And the second thing, in terms of the Abe sustainability, well, if we have some polls asking the people in general that whether the popularity is about Abe, the largest number of responses is like this: well, there's no substitute, so that's why. And many people are, of course, naturally quite worried about the frictions with the neighboring countries. But Abe is making a kind of economy as a hostages. And now things are quite getting better in absolute terms in Japan. So people can't say anything about the other things like diplomatic issues or other things. So as long as the atmosphere is almost like let the economy go first and then we'll decide, we'll try to recover things. And that might be the I don't think it's not the right way of tackling things, but that's strategies of Abe until the elections in July. And unfortunately, the chances that LDP is going to continue the ruling parties is almost quite certain if the economy goes like this. So I think after the elections in July, Abe's, and especially even worse, the people who are surrounding Abe will change their way of thinking and the priorities, and they will take some rational approach towards the Asian integrations, especially. That may change something, but things are quite serious, and that is very much understood in Japan too. Okay, I think.
Okay, I suppose there are many more questions and comments from the floor, but unfortunately, we're actually behind the schedule. Thank you very much for very, very excellent and candid the presentations on Abenomics and TPP. You know, as some comments were made from the floor, Japan is the closest neighboring nation, and more importantly, Japan is still the third largest economy in the world, and is a major trading partner for Korea. So we all wish your success and do well. And I don't think anyone really wants to see Japan fails in the national endeavor. However, politicians always try to politicize things for their domestic advantage, political advantage. For example, when Prime Minister Abe decided to inject this huge liquidity, he openly said, let alone, the Prime Minister consulting with neighboring countries, said the purpose is the exchange rate. That was his big mistake.
Oh, he didn't understand at all.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But ordinary people know that that's what he meant, and the U.S. Bernanke never said that, and the President Obama will never say that when introduce QEs, and so that's for, in my interpretation, that's for domestic political purpose. And that's exactly what he wanted to. But I think there was the mistake. And secondly, you rightly said that the business should be separated from politics. But in reality, it's impossible. Unless, the neighboring countries shares a mutual trust. And as long as we have mutual suspicion, economic cooperation cannot go too far, in my view. Actually, this political reconciliation and understanding, people to people understanding is very important. So as long as, political, the agitation, or, whatever side it is, I don't say just, and Korean politicians too, I really think that should not use these emotional issues for their own political advantage. So, but in the reality is that it's very hard to separate. And so, when I think, it's all economists, they would ask the economic aspect, they would say, Abenomics is good and hope that it will succeed. But again, the key is in the third arrow area, which I really don't know how serious Abe is about. And actually, he's the one who opposed the postal service reform during the Koizumi era, right? And so we don't know how committed he is, but we hope he would implement structural adjustments so that he can have Abenomics succeed. But in any case, the bottom line is Koreans are not against Abenomics per se, but we hope to see. But let's not really, take advantage of this, the national emotions prevailing in this region. And after all, we have to live together. The nation cannot move to other places, and so we have to work together. Well, anyway, so we are already behind, and thank you. Yeah, please.
I think we need some serious dialogue between Japan and Korea. There's a lot of misunderstanding about, and of course, we have to educate our politicians far better. But things are quite complicated in recent years. But we have to be serious about their further dialogue and
person like you who knows Korea so well, and so can play a very important role. And we all have to play important roles so that the politicians can change. Politicians always problem. Well, with this, yes.
Can Jeff add a sentence on TPA? Trade promotion authority.
I will give you 3 paragraphs privately. But TPA is only the one legislative problem the United States has. The Farm Bill may be more important in terms of the trade negotiations. But I'll give you the details privately.
You cannot be very optimistic.
I'm optimistic that there will be trade promotion authority, possibly by later this year, since there is a bipartisan support for it in the Congress.
U.S. Congress always act at the last minute anyway, and in fiscal cliff, and let's be optimistic about
5
it.
years after the last
right, yeah.
Of course.
Well, with this, we have to end, and maybe, the thing is we have to bring both speakers again. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.